On July 12, 2002, in a sprawling lakefront city known for its biting winters and sweltering summers, a note was left on a couch in a second-floor apartment. Penned in the careful, looping cursive of a 10-year-old girl, it offered a simple explanation for an empty home. The girls had gone to the store and to school. But school was out for the summer, the sun was already high in the sky, and the two sisters, 10-year-old Alana Price and 3-year-old Maya, were gone. For 2 decades, their absence would become a defining mystery for the city's south sector, a story of profound loss and a mother's relentless hope. The investigation would consume thousands of hours, generate countless leads, and ultimately grow cold, the case file thickening with reports that led nowhere. Then, 20 years later, a single electrifying claim from a woman in another state would force the city to look again, reigniting a search that had never truly ended and proving that even after 2 decades of silence, a new chapter could still be written with the help of modern science and unwavering love. The summer of 2002 had settled over the city with a heavy, humid blanket. In the south sector, the heat radiated from the asphalt in shimmering waves, and the air was thick with the scent of hot pavement and grilled food from the neighborhood block parties. Children's laughter echoed from parks where sprinklers offered the only relief, and the drone of window air conditioning units was a constant, humming soundtrack. Life in the Lakeview Gardens apartment complex was a microcosm of this urban summer. It was a community of families, of people who worked hard and looked out for one another. Doors were often left unlocked, and children played in the shared courtyard under the watchful eyes of multiple parents. It felt safe. Victoria Price lived in one of those apartments with her 2 daughters, Alana and Maya. At 30 years old, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood with a quiet resilience. Her life revolved around her girls. They were her purpose, the center of her universe. Every decision she made, from the hours she worked to the food she bought, was for them. Her apartment was not large, but it was filled with their presence. Crayola drawings were taped to the refrigerator. Small toys were scattered in a designated corner of the living room, and the faint, sweet smell of children's shampoo seemed to linger in the air. Alana, at 10, was on the cusp of adolescence. She was a bright and thoughtful girl, with a maturity that often surprised the adults around her. She was an excellent student, her report cards filled with praise from her teachers. She loved to read, often losing herself for hours in books she brought home from the school library. But her defining characteristic was her role as a big sister. She doted on Maya, treating her with a gentle patience that was remarkable for a child her age. She was Maya's protector, her playmate, and her teacher. Alana taught Maya her colors, helped her with her first words, and could always make her laugh, even when she was on the verge of a toddler's tantrum. Maya, at 3, was a bundle of pure energy and joy. With big, curious eyes and a smile that could light up the entire room, she was adored by everyone in the building. She was her mother's shadow and her sister's echo, toddling happily after Alana wherever she went. Her vocabulary was a charming mix of simple words and half-formed sentences, but she communicated her needs and her happiness with perfect clarity. She was a happy child, cocooned in the love of her mother and her older sister. The bond between the 2 sisters was palpable. They were rarely apart. When Alana went to a friend's house to play, Maya often tagged along. When Alana sat on the floor to draw, Maya would be beside her with her own piece of paper and a fistful of crayons. They shared a small bedroom, their beds separated by a narrow nightstand. At night, Victoria would often find them asleep in the same bed, Maya curled up against Alana's side, a silent testament to their deep connection. Their world was small and secure, built on the foundation of their mother's love and their own unshakable sisterhood. The morning of July 12th began like any other Friday. The sun rose early, casting a warm golden light through the apartment windows. Victoria had to go to work for a few hours. It was a short shift, and she had done this before. Alana was responsible, and the girls would be fine for a little while. They had a routine. She gave them breakfast and laid out instructions. They were not to open the door for anyone. They could watch cartoons and play with their toys. She would be home before lunch. Her last conversation with her daughters was mundane, the kind of exchange that happens 1,000 times in a family's life and is instantly forgotten. She reminded Alana to look after her little sister. She kissed them both goodbye. She told them she loved them and that she would see them soon. Their voices, clear and bright, followed her to the door. She closed it behind her, the lock clicking into place, and walked out into the oppressive morning heat, her mind already on the tasks of the day. She had no way of knowing that the simple, ordinary world she was leaving behind was about to shatter, and the sound of her daughters' voices would become a memory she would replay in her mind for the next 20 years, searching for any hint, any clue, any premonition of what was to come. The city's rhythm carried on around her as she made her way to work. The buses hissed, the traffic flowed, people hurried along the sidewalks. It was just another day. But in the quiet of her second-floor apartment, something was happening. The chain of events that would lead to the disappearance of Alana and Maya Price had been set in motion. The morning ticked by, the sun climbed higher. The cartoons on the television played to an empty room. Victoria finished her shift and began her journey home. She felt the familiar, pleasant anticipation of seeing her girls. She wondered what they were doing, if they were getting hungry. She planned to make them their favorite lunch. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she noticed the quiet. Usually, she could hear the television or the sound of them playing as she approached the door. Today, there was only silence. She turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The apartment was still. It was neat, too neat. The toys were in their box. The television was off. A strange stillness had settled over the space. She called their names. Alana? Maya? Her voice echoed slightly in the quiet rooms. There was no answer. A flicker of annoyance mixed with concern went through her. Maybe they had gone to a neighbor's apartment, though Alana knew she was supposed to ask first. She walked through the living room, her eyes scanning for any sign of them. That is when she saw it. A single piece of folded notebook paper, placed neatly on the arm of the sofa. She picked it up. The handwriting was Alana's, the careful letters she had practiced so diligently for school. The message was short and, at first glance, simple. It said they had gone to the store and to school. Victoria read it once, then twice. A wave of confusion washed over her. The store? They had plenty of snacks. School? It was the middle of July. It made no sense. The initial confusion quickly gave way to a cold, creeping dread. This was wrong. Something was fundamentally wrong. She checked their bedroom again. Their beds were made. Their clothes were in the closet. Nothing seemed out of place, except for the profound and terrifying emptiness. She ran to the apartment next door and knocked frantically. Her neighbor had not seen the girls. She tried the apartment across the hall. The same answer. Panic began to take hold, a tightening in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She raced back into her apartment and picked up the phone, her hands trembling as she dialed her mother's number. Her voice was strained as she explained the situation, the nonsensical note, the empty apartment. Her mother urged her to call the authorities immediately. The call to the police was a blur. She tried to explain the situation coherently, but her words were jumbled with fear. The dispatcher's calm, procedural questions felt surreal. Yes, she had checked with the neighbors. No, there were no signs of a break-in. The door had been locked when she arrived. 10 and 3 years old, Alana and Maya Price. After she hung up, the silence in the apartment became unbearable. Every tick of the clock on the wall seemed to mock her, counting the seconds her children were missing. She walked from room to room, touching their things, their small shoes by the door, the stuffed animal Maya slept with every night. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. Her daughters were not just out playing, they were gone, and a cryptic note was the only clue they had left behind. The wait for the first patrol car to arrive felt like an eternity. It was the beginning of a nightmare from which she would not wake for a very long time. The arrival of the first patrol car marked the formal beginning of the investigation. 2 uniformed officers stepped out into the July heat, their expressions serious and professional. They listened patiently as Victoria, her voice choked with emotion, recounted the morning's events. They walked through the apartment, their eyes taking in the scene. It was unsettling in its normalcy. There were no overturned tables, no shattered windows, no signs of a struggle. The only thing out of place was the absence of the 2 children who lived there. The note was treated with care, placed in an evidence bag. It was the only tangible piece of information they had. The officer's initial assessment was that this was not a typical runaway situation. A 10-year-old might run to a friend's house, but she would not take her 3-year-old sister with her. And the mention of school in the middle of summer was a significant red flag. It suggested something was amiss, that the note was not a straightforward explanation. Detectives were called to the scene. These were seasoned investigators from the city's Violent Crimes Division, men and women who had seen the worst of what people could do to each other. They brought with them a different kind of energy, a methodical intensity. Their focus was on details. They questioned Victoria again, this time going over her timeline minute by minute. Who had she seen that morning? Who knew she would be at work? Was there anyone who had shown an unusual interest in her children? The questions were difficult and deeply personal, probing into the private corners of her life. She answered everything, her mind racing to find some detail, some person, some event that could explain the impossible. But there was nothing. Her life was ordinary. She had no enemies. Her circle of friends and family was small and trusted. While some detectives spoke with Victoria, others fanned out into the neighborhood. They began the painstaking process of knocking on every door in the apartment complex and the surrounding buildings. They asked the same questions over and over. Did you see 2 young girls this morning? One 10, one 3. Did you see them with an adult? Did you notice any strange cars or people in the area? The responses were a frustrating mix of helpfulness and uncertainty. Some people had been at work and seen nothing. Others had heard the usual sounds of children playing, but could not be sure if it was the Price sisters. A few people offered vague sightings. One neighbor thought she had seen Alana walking toward the corner store early in the morning, but she was not certain about the time and did not see Maya with her. Another resident reported seeing a man talking to some children in the courtyard, but his description was generic and did not match anyone known to the family. Each potential lead was noted, but none provided a clear direction. As news of the girl's disappearance spread, the community's response was immediate and overwhelming. The initial fear that rippled through the apartment complex quickly transformed into a powerful wave of collective action. Neighbors who had only exchanged polite greetings in the hallway now stood together on the lawn, sharing information and organizing search parties. The courtyard of the Lakeview Gardens complex became an impromptu command center. Flyers were printed, thousands of them. They featured smiling school pictures of Alana and a candid snapshot of Maya with a wide, joyful grin. The words "missing" were printed in bold letters at the top. Volunteers took stacks of these flyers and spread out across the city, taping them to utility poles, in the windows of corner stores, at bus stops, and on community bulletin boards. The faces of the two sisters were suddenly everywhere, their innocent smiles a stark contrast to the grim reality of their disappearance. Large-scale searches were organized. Hundreds of volunteers from the neighborhood and beyond gathered to comb through the area. They moved in long, disciplined lines through local parks, checking behind every bush and in every wooded area. They searched abandoned buildings, their flashlights cutting through the dusty darkness. They walked along the nearby railroad tracks and the banks of the city's river. They were driven by a desperate hope that they would find the girls, perhaps lost or hiding, waiting to be found. But each search area that was cleared without success only added to the growing sense of dread. The local media descended on the scene, their news vans lining the street outside the apartment complex. The story of the missing sisters became the lead item on every local news broadcast. Victoria, despite her immense grief, agreed to speak to the cameras. Her face, etched with pain and exhaustion, was broadcast into homes across the city. She made a tearful plea for her daughter's safe return, her voice breaking as she spoke directly to them, telling them she loved them and was waiting for them. Her raw, unfiltered anguish resonated with the public, and the story became more than just a news item. It became a city's shared tragedy. In the days that followed, the investigation intensified. The initial theory that the girls had simply wandered off was quickly discarded. Alana was too responsible, and the note was too strange. The focus shifted to the possibility of an abduction. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was brought in to assist the local police department, providing resources and expertise in child abduction cases. Investigators worked tirelessly, following every lead, no matter how small or unlikely. They re-interviewed Victoria, her family, and her friends, building a detailed picture of their lives. They looked into registered offenders in the area. They analyzed security camera footage from nearby businesses, but the quality was poor, and the cameras were not pointed in the right directions. The note remained a central piece of the puzzle. Handwriting experts confirmed that Alana had written it, but this only deepened the mystery. Was she coerced? Did she write it under duress, with someone standing over her shoulder? Or was she tricked into writing it by someone she knew and trusted? The phrase "store and school" was dissected endlessly. Was it a code? Was school a reference to a specific person or place? Every possibility was explored, but no definitive answers emerged. The early persons of interest were identified and investigated. This included family members, friends, and neighbors. It was standard procedure, but it was a painful process for a family already in turmoil. Everyone provided alibis, and one by one, they were cleared. The circle of suspicion widened, but there was no one to focus on. The perpetrator, if there was one, had left no witnesses and no clear trail. The days turned into a week, then two. The initial flurry of tips began to slow. The massive volunteer searches yielded nothing. The investigation had hit a wall, a terrible, silent, and impenetrable wall. Time began to stretch and distort for Victoria Price. The first few weeks were a blur of police interviews, media attention, and frantic hope. Every phone call could be the one. Every knock on the door could be news. But as weeks turned into months, a new and agonizing reality set in. The days were marked by a heavy, suffocating silence. The initial surge of activity around her receded, leaving her in a quiet vacuum of grief and uncertainty. The first anniversary of the girl's disappearance was a somber milestone. The media returned, and a prayer vigil was held in the courtyard of the apartment complex. Neighbors and community members gathered with candles, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They shared memories of the girls and offered prayers for their safe return. It was a powerful display of solidarity, but it also underscored the painful truth. A year had passed, and they were no closer to finding answers. As the years continued to slide by, the world moved on. The news cycle, once saturated with the story of the missing Price sisters, found new tragedies to report. The flyers that had papered the city faded under the sun, their ink bleeding in the rain until the girls' faces were ghostly images. Eventually, they were torn down or covered over with new posters for concerts and community events. The national attention dissipated, leaving the family to navigate their limbo alone. The investigation, once a top priority for the department, officially went cold. The case file, now several thick binders filled with reports, witness statements, and dead-end leads, was moved from the active investigation unit to the cold case archives. It was a procedural step, but for Victoria it felt like a final devastating blow. It meant that the daily active search for her daughters was over. The lead detective on the case, a man named Miller, was haunted by it. He had been with the investigation from the first day, and the faces of Alana and Maya were etched into his memory. He kept their pictures on his desk long after the case went cold, a constant reminder of his failure to bring them home. He would periodically pull the files, rereading the reports, hoping to see something he had missed, some small detail that could unlock the entire mystery. But the pages offered no new insights. He retired a decade after the girls vanished, the unresolved Price case the biggest regret of his long career. He passed the file on to his successor, a silent transfer of an immense and unsolved burden. For Victoria, life became a state of perpetual waiting. She never moved from the apartment in Lakeview Gardens. To leave felt like giving up, like abandoning the last place her daughters had been. For years, she kept their bedroom exactly as they had left it. Their toys were on the shelves, their clothes were in the drawers. It was a painful shrine, a room frozen in time. She would sometimes sit on the edge of Alana's bed, the silence of the room amplifying the ache in her heart. She found a new purpose in advocacy. She became a voice for other families of missing children, sharing her story at conferences and events. She worked to keep her daughter's memory alive in the public consciousness, granting interviews on the anniversary of their disappearance each year. In these interviews, her grief was always evident, but so was her fierce, unwavering resolve. She spoke of her daughters in the present tense. She believed they were still alive, somewhere, waiting to be found. This belief was not a denial of the grim possibilities. It was a conscious choice, a shield against the crushing weight of despair. It was the only way she could continue to function, to get out of bed each morning and face another day of not knowing. Anniversaries came and went, the 5th, the 10th, the 15th. Each one was a fresh wave of pain, a reminder of all the moments she had missed. First days of school, birthdays, holidays. She imagined what they would look like, what their voices would sound like. Alana would be a young woman, perhaps in college. Maya would be a teenager. These ghostly images of her grown-up daughters lived in her mind, a constant and bittersweet presence. The community had not forgotten, but their memory had softened, becoming a part of the city's sad folklore. The story of the two sisters who vanished on a hot July day was a cautionary tale, a permanent scar on the neighborhood's sense of security. Victoria Price, however, did not have the luxury of letting the memory soften. For her, the wound remained open, as raw and painful as it was on that first terrible day. Her long, lonely vigil continued. 2 decades after Alana and Maya Price vanished, the world was a different place. Technology had advanced in ways that would have seemed like science fiction in 2002. The internet and social media had connected the globe, allowing information to spread instantly. And in the world of forensics, the advent of genetic genealogy was beginning to solve cold cases that had been dormant for half a century. It was in this new world that the Price case was suddenly and unexpectedly brought back to life. The catalyst was a single, stunning claim. In early 2022, a young woman living in a city several states away contacted law enforcement. She was in her early 20s, and she told them a remarkable story. She claimed that she had vague, fragmented memories of a childhood in a different city, of an older sister, of a different name. She believed she was Maya Price. The news of the claim spread like wildfire. It was picked up by local news, then national outlets. For the first time in years, the names Alana and Maya Price were on the front pages and at the top of news broadcasts. The story was irresistible, a potential miracle, a resolution to a 20-year mystery. For Victoria, the news was a seismic shock. After so many years of false hope and dead ends, this felt different. The woman's age was correct. Some of the details she provided, though hazy, seemed to align. A fragile, terrifying hope began to bloom in her heart. The city's police department, now with a new generation of detectives in its cold case unit, mobilized immediately. The claim had to be investigated thoroughly and sensitively. The primary and most definitive tool at their disposal was DNA. The protocol was straightforward. A DNA sample would be collected from the claimant and compared to the sample from Victoria that had been on file for 2 decades. It was a simple test, but one that held the power to either reunite a family or deliver a devastating blow. While they awaited the results, the detectives saw a unique opportunity. The case was back in the public eye, commanding a level of attention it had not received since the initial disappearance. They decided to leverage this renewed interest. They worked with forensic artists to create new age-progressed images of the sisters. These were not the simple sketches of the past. Using advanced software, the artists created detailed, lifelike portraits of what Alana and Maya might look like as women in their 30s and early 20s. Alana was depicted as a woman of 30, her face retaining the thoughtful intelligence of her childhood photos, her eyes deep and serious. Maya, at 23, was shown with the same bright, open smile she had as a toddler. These images were powerful and haunting. They gave a tangible face to the missing girls, transforming them from victims frozen in time into the women they should have become. The images were released to the media and spread across social media platforms, shared millions of times within days. The renewed attention prompted the cold case team to formally reopen the investigation. They unboxed the original case files, the paper brittle and yellowed with age. They began the methodical process of re-examining every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every report from 2002. They were looking at the case with fresh eyes, aided by 2 decades of advancements in investigative techniques and psychological profiling. They digitized the entire file, creating a searchable database of every name, address, and phone number mentioned. They cross-referenced old persons of interest with new criminal databases. They re-interviewed original witnesses whose memories might have been jogged by the new publicity. It was a monumental task, a forensic archaeology of a 20-year-old mystery. The note, the single piece of physical evidence left by the girls, was subjected to a new level of scrutiny. The line about going to school during the summer had always been a sticking point. To the original investigators, it was a bizarre detail that suggested coercion. To the new team, it was a potential key. They brainstormed its meaning. Was school a code word for a person? A place? Was it something Elena was told to write by someone who was not aware that school was out? This peculiar detail, once just a strange fact, was now viewed as a critical clue, a potential window into the psychology of the person who had taken the girls. The city and Victoria Price held their breath, waiting for the results of the DNA test, while investigators worked to unravel a mystery that was now, finally, active again. The focus of the reignited investigation became twofold. One track was the meticulous, procedural path of science, the DNA test that would confirm or deny the claimant's identity. The other was a deep dive back into the original case file, searching for clues that might have been misinterpreted or overlooked 2 decades prior. While the world waited for the DNA results, the cold case detectives immersed themselves in the past. The claimant in the distant city became, in a sense, the primary suspect in the mystery of her own identity. Investigators on her end conducted a background check, tracing her life story as far back as they could. They spoke with her adoptive family, her friends, and her teachers. Her life appeared to be ordinary, marked by the usual ups and downs of growing up. There was no obvious sign of trauma or a hidden past, but the woman herself was convinced of her fragmented memories. She cooperated fully with the investigation, driven by a genuine need to understand who she was. The process was delicate, handled with a mix of procedural rigor and human empathy. The collection of the DNA sample was a clinical, quiet affair. A simple swab from inside her cheek was all it took. The sample was carefully packaged, documented, and sent to the state crime lab. A similar process was undertaken for Victoria. Though her DNA was already on file, new samples were taken to ensure the integrity of the comparison. These small plastic tubes held the potential answer to a 20-year-old question. The lab expedited the analysis, aware of the immense public interest and the profound personal stakes for the family. The waiting began, an agonizing period of days where every ring of the phone could be the news. During this wait, the new age-progressed images of Alana and Maya continued to circulate, generating a flood of new tips to the police department. The hotline, which had been silent for years, was suddenly overwhelmed. Detectives fielded hundreds of calls and emails. Most were well-intentioned, but ultimately unhelpful sightings. People who saw a woman in a coffee shop who resembled the image of Alana, or a young cashier who had Maya's smile. Each tip had to be logged, vetted, and, in most cases, dismissed. But it was a sign that the city had not forgotten, and that the public was eager to help. Then, the call from the crime lab came. The results were in. A senior detective was tasked with delivering the news to Victoria Price. He met her at her apartment, the same apartment where it had all begun. The atmosphere was thick with tension and fragile hope. The detective delivered the news gently but directly. The DNA was not a match. The claimant was not Maya Price. The scientific results were conclusive, leaving no room for doubt or ambiguity. For Victoria, the news was a crushing weight. The flicker of hope that had sustained her through the preceding weeks was extinguished in an instant. It was a uniquely cruel form of grief, the loss of a child she had, for a brief moment, allowed herself to believe had been found. The tears she shed were not just for the present disappointment, but for the 20 years of accumulated pain that had come rushing back to the surface. The confession in this chapter of the story was not from a perpetrator, but from science itself. The DNA spoke the truth, a truth that was heartbreaking for the family, but necessary for the investigation. It closed the door on the possibility that this particular young woman was Maya, allowing investigators to refocus their efforts. The claimant's motivations were never fully understood. She was perhaps a troubled individual who had latched onto a public tragedy to make sense of her own life. She became a strange, sad footnote in the larger narrative of the Price sisters. The negative DNA test was the definitive corroboration that this lead was a dead end. But in a strange way, it served as a powerful catalyst. The intense media spotlight it had generated did not simply fade away. Instead, it remained focused on the case. The police department, having already committed to a full re-examination of the evidence, used the moment to publicly reaffirm their dedication to finding the real answers. The false lead had inadvertently breathed new life into a case that had been dormant for a generation, and the search for Alana and Maya was now more active and more visible than it had been in 2 decades. The disappointment was immense, but from its ashes rose a renewed and more realistic sense of purpose. In the immediate aftermath of the DNA results, the city's police department held a press conference. The room was packed with reporters and television cameras, the media presence a direct result of the weeks of speculation surrounding the claimant. The lead detective on the cold case squad stepped up to the podium. He began by announcing the results of the test, confirming that the woman who had come forward was not Maya Price. A quiet murmur went through the room, but the detective quickly pivoted. He made it clear that this was not the end of the story, but a new beginning for the investigation. He spoke of the renewed commitment of his department to solve the case. He formally unveiled the new age-progressed images of Alana and Maya to the wider public, holding up large posters of the 2 women they might have become. He announced the creation of a new, dedicated tip line and an email address for information. He spoke about the new technologies they were exploring, including the potential for using genetic genealogy if any usable DNA evidence from 2002 could be isolated. The message was clear. The book was not closed on the Price sisters. A new chapter was just beginning. The most difficult task for the investigators was informing Victoria Price. The same detective who had delivered the initial news of the DNA results now had a different conversation with her. He sat with her in her living room, a place filled with the ghosts of her children, and explained the department's new strategy. He assured her that they were not giving up. He showed her the new forensic images, a moment of profound and complex emotion for Victoria. To see the faces of her daughters as grown women was both a gift and a source of deep pain. It was a vision of a future that had been stolen from her. Yet through her grief, Victoria found a renewed strength. She had faced a significant emotional blow, but her core resolve remained unshaken. She agreed to speak to the media again. This time, her message was different. It was not just a plea for her daughter's return, but a call to action. She stood before the cameras, her voice steady and firm, and asked the public to look closely at the new images. She spoke not of the false hope that had just been dashed, but of the real hope that the truth was still out there. She asked that anyone with even the smallest piece of information, something they might have seen 20 years ago and dismissed as unimportant, to please come forward. Her strength in the face of such profound disappointment was remarkable, and her plea galvanized public support once more. With no perpetrator identified, there were no legal proceedings in the traditional sense. The focus of the justice phase of the narrative shifted to the forensic and investigative process itself. The police department made a public show of dedicating resources to the case. The old evidence boxes were brought to the forensic lab for re-examination. Every item from the apartment was looked at again, in the hope that modern techniques could reveal something missed in 2002. They were searching for a single hair, a skin cell, a drop of sweat, any trace of DNA from an unknown individual that could be used to build a genetic profile. The concept of genetic genealogy was explained to the public through the media coverage. It was presented as the best new hope for solving the case. Experts described how a tiny sample of DNA could be uploaded to public genealogy databases, potentially identifying a distant cousin of the perpetrator. From that match, investigators could build a family tree, working their way down through the generations until they identified their suspect. It was a long and arduous process, but it had been successful in solving dozens of other cold cases. This new scientific possibility offered a concrete reason for hope, a departure from the endless cycle of speculation that had defined the case for so long. The resolution for now was not in a courtroom, but in the quiet, meticulous work of detectives and lab technicians, and in the enduring public hope that their efforts would finally, after so many years, lead to the truth. The community's reaction to the renewed investigation was a testament to the deep mark the case had left on the city's consciousness. The new age-progressed images became a viral phenomenon. They were shared on social media by celebrities, influencers, and ordinary citizens, reaching an audience far beyond the city limits. The story was picked up by popular true crime podcasts and featured in online documentary series. A new generation, who had been children themselves when the girls disappeared, learned the names Alana and Maya Price for the first time. The story resonated with them, a chilling reminder of the fragility of childhood innocence. Online communities of amateur sleuths formed, dedicated to dissecting the case. They analyzed the note, debated theories about the school reference, and cross-referenced old news articles. While much of their speculation was wild and unfounded, it kept the case in the public conversation, preventing it from fading back into the obscurity of a cold case file. For the first time, the investigation was happening not just in police offices, but in the open, fueled by the collective energy of thousands of interested people. The perpetrator of the crime, however, remained a ghost. 2 decades had passed. This person, or people, had lived for more than 20 years with the knowledge of what they had done. The narrative of their life was a profound mystery. Did they stay in the city, hiding in plain sight? Did they flee and start a new life elsewhere? Were they still alive? Investigators and the public could only speculate. This individual had watched the news reports over the years, had seen Victoria's pleas, and had remained silent. They had become a part of their community, a neighbor, a co-worker, a family member, all while harboring a secret of unimaginable darkness. This facelessness was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the crime. The evil that had visited the Price family was not a mythical monster, but an ordinary person who had chosen to commit an extraordinary act of cruelty and had simply walked away, melting back into the fabric of society. The weight of that secret was its own kind of prison, but it offered no justice or comfort to the family left behind. Victoria Price continued her life's work, her advocacy now amplified by the new national spotlight. She partnered with national centers for missing and exploited children, using her platform to raise awareness and to support other families who were living in the same agonizing limbo. Her personal tragedy had been transformed into a public mission. She understood that even if she never found her own daughters, her fight could help bring someone else's child home. This became her legacy. The legacy of Alana and Mia was no longer just one of tragedy, but one of enduring persistence. Foundations were established in their names, raising money for child safety programs and providing resources for families of the missing. Annual community events were held on the anniversary of their disappearance, not just as somber memorials, but as celebrations of the girls' lives and as a public reaffirmation of the ongoing search. Their story became a symbol of a community's refusal to forget and a mother's unbreakable bond with her children. The final chapter of the story of Alana and Maya Price remains unwritten. The case is active, the tips are still being investigated, and the hope of a breakthrough with genetic technology is still alive. For Victoria, the waiting continues, as it has for more than 20 years. But the nature of her wait has changed. She is no longer alone in a silent apartment. She is at the forefront of a re-energized movement, supported by a city and a nation that has once again taken her daughter's story to heart. The narrative concludes not with a resolution, but with a reflection on the enduring power of memory and love. Justice, delayed for so long, is still being pursued with the best tools that modern science can offer. But in the absence of definitive answers, the family and the community have forged a different kind of conclusion. They have ensured that Alana and Maya are not defined by their disappearance, but by the love they inspired and the relentless fight for truth that continues in their name. The hope is that one day a new discovery will be made, a final piece of the puzzle will fall into place, and the long, painful vigil will finally come to an end. Until that day, a mother waits and a city remembers.